Quad 66. I'm doing a video here on, it's going to be two parts. So the first part is going to be doing some of the basic settings in Betaflight 4.2, and the second video is actually going to be walking through a PID tuning session. And the reason I'm doing this is because Betaflight 4.2 is coming out very shortly. I'm already on the release candidates, and they're working well. And also, there seems to be a general lack of setup and tuning for these micros, and so I figure this is a good time to do this, and maybe it'll help quite a bit of people. So this isn't the deep dive, this is kind of the quick and dirty way to get yourself set up. So in general, these little micros, we're flying these F4 processors, and so this is geared towards that. This should be true for most things. If you got an old F3, this doesn't apply, or if you're flying something weird, it doesn't apply either. So setup on your configuration tab. Configuration, you want D-Shot 300, and the reason you want D-Shot 300 is because we're going to drop our our PID loop frequency to 4 kilohertz, and so that's what's D-Shot 300 goes along with that. In general, I do recommend you doing RPM filtering, and to enable that, you want to click this to get your bidirectional D-Shot, and you want to set your motor poles. I think in all of these motors, our motor poles should be 12. So you you want to check that on your motor, but 12 should be what you need in there. And so to do RPM filtering, it takes up a little bit of extra processing power, and that's why the PID loop frequency, you can't quite push it to 8, you got to do 4, and when you drop this to 4, that's why you're on D-Shot 300. Other things you want to do, you want to free up as much CPU space as possible, or processing space as possible, and so turn off everything you can possibly turn off. So if you're flying angle mode, obviously you can't turn off your accelerometer, but if you're not flying angle mode, turn this off. That's going to free up some space. Then just coming down here, this is going to be kind of the usual stuff where you want air mode on, you want your OSD on, you want anti-gravity on, and this is how you turn on your dynamic filtering or RPM filtering. Make sure that that is on. And I think that covers all kind of the new or different stuff or relevant stuff from the configuration tab. Going over to your pound battery, this is now more important than it used to be, and the reason for that is because there's a new feature called VBAT sag compensation, which replaces, you use instead of VBAT PID compensation, and it takes into account what your minimum cell voltage is and maximum cell voltage to give you consistent throttle and PID response all the way through. And so this matters now. So for the most part with high volts on 1S, or also 2S obviously because it just multiplies it, you usually have to set this to 4.4 to not trip it, because sometimes if the battery's a little overcharged, it might go over that and then it fools it into thinking how many, if it's 1S or 2S. And then you want to set your minimum voltage down to the voltage that you're going to be landing on, because that VBAT sag compensation is basically going to be taking the percentage that you are along here and smoothing that out. So you don't want to set this, or your minimum cell voltage, you don't want to set this super low to like 3 if you're always landing at 3.5, because then it's going to over decrease how much sag compensation there is. So you really truly want to set this to that minimum cell voltage that you're going to be landing at. Alright, fail-safe shouldn't be anything new. PID tuning. PID tuning. So first place to go with PID tuning is our filter settings. And our filter settings, you got to turn on enable expert mode, and that gives you the ability to push these sliders all the way to the right. You want to do this slowly and carefully and make sure you don't burn up motors, but in general I've been able to get all my micros all the way out here to the right. And the reason we want to get them all the way to the right is because that changes these numbers in here, and the further right we are, the less filtering it is. Less filtering is good because it means less latency, and so the less latency you have, the sharper, crisper response to you. And also, it handles like prop wash and stuff like that better. Then down here, this is going to be setting up our RPM filter. So for our RPM filtering, you want to do 1 harmonic. If you have a very noisy, soft, flexible frame with more harmonics and you need to crush those out, you might want to bounce that up to 2. Also, if you're kind of on a whoop, RPM filtering may not make sense because you may have so much noise in the harmonics that you may not want to do this. But I think for open prop stuff in general, RPM filtering is good. harmonics to 1. Minimum frequency, I use 100 here, and that seems to work pretty well. I don't have black box, so maybe that could, some of these things I don't know 100%. Dynamic notch width percent, you can turn it down to 0. Your Q to 250. Dynamic notch min hertz, 100. And dynamic notch max hertz, 350. 350 corresponds to what used to be low. So there used to be like a low and a high, or is it medium? I forget. But 350 corresponds to the prior low setting. Okay. So once you got your filters in there, then we can go to PID. Actually, a couple things in the command line first, and a reason for that. So in the command line, I've been finding that thrust linearization tends to be helpful more often than not. I haven't found it harmful. The concept with thrust linearization is that it should help with like kind of overprop situations, and it gives you basically more PID at lower throttles and less PID at higher throttles. And to set that, what you want to do is go set thrusts. It's not giving me any help here, but it should be thrust. Well, normally it pops up with a little autocomplete. Oh, I guess some failed there. I don't know why. So you want to do set thrust linear to 50. And then once you put in your commands, you also have to do save and then hit enter. I'm not going to do that because I already have it in here. If you forget what you set it to, or you want to check, you do set or get thrust linear. Sorry. Okay. Get thrust linear. So if I'm checking, you type in the command get thrust linear, shows I already got it 50. And the other thing you're going to want to do in here is you're going to want to set your VBAT sag. I wish it was doing autocomplete. Help me out here. Solution. And when you're tuning your quad, especially, you want to set it to 100. And again, to check, you can do the get command. The reason you want to do it 100 is because that's going to give you perfectly smooth, perfectly equal response from fresh battery to low battery. If on your 1S quad you want a little bit of hero volts at the beginning, you maybe want to do something more along the lines of 80, 85, 90, so that way you can get that little benefit of the high volts at the beginning without getting too crazy different. Okay, so the reason you got to set this up first before you go into your PID tuning, because this is going to greatly affect how you tune your PID. The reason that I say set this to 100 to start with is because you haven't tuned your PID yet, and while you're doing that, you definitely want this on 100. Okay. So then, in your PID tuning, I'm not going to go through PID tuning right now. That's going to be the second video. But some of the things in general you're going to want to do is you want to make sure you have some throttle boost. 5 is default. I think that works. Your dynamic idle value. So this, you want to get this as low as you can without going too low. 25 I found to be very safe, and then on some quads I can push it down as low as 22, maybe even lower without it desyncing. So what you want to do is you want to start somewhere, maybe 25, and keep bumping it down until you get desyncs, and then once you get desyncs, bump it back up by 1 or 2 points. And that sets your dynamic, that's your idle min RPM. I don't know why they label it here now, dynamic idle value, but that's your idle min RPM. Anyways, what else we got? So now that we're using VBAT sag competition, we want to make sure our VBAT PID competition is off. And then in general, especially when you start tuning, turn off your D-min. And in general, in these little quads, I've been finding D-min to be more problematic than helpful. I've been seeing that I get weird bobbles with it, and so I've been finding just turn it off, leave it off, and then once you're done tuning, if you want to turn it on, you can go ahead and do that. And so that should be all the settings that you need to get started, and then in the next video I'm going to do the actual PID tuning. Okay, until next time, cheers.